He raised them from cubs. His wife watched them kill him. It was the morning of August 26, 2020, on the grounds of Lion Tree Top Lodge, a family-run safari property tucked into the bush outside Hoedspruit, roughly 280 miles northwest of Johannesburg in South Africa's Limpopo province, not far from the northern boundary of Kruger National Park itself. The air was still cool, the kind of early light that safari mornings are built around. The lodge quiet because no guests happened to be staying there that particular week. It was a routine so familiar it had stopped registering as risk to anyone who watched it happen, including most critically to the man who lived it every single day. Wes Mathewson, 68, was not a tourist playing at danger for a camera, and this matters because most stories in this genre involve a stranger who misjudged an animal they barely knew. He was the man locals called Uncle West, a well-known conservationist who had spent years working to protect endangered species in the region, white lions among them, someone the local community genuinely respected for the work itself, not just tolerated for the tourism dollars his lodge brought into a small town that depended on visitors passing through. Years earlier, he had rescued 2 lionesses, Demi and Tanner, from a canned hunting operation near Polokwane, a breeding farm that exists purely to raise lions in captivity, so paying clients can shoot them inside a fenced enclosure, with no real hunt involved at all, just a guaranteed kill. Mathewson took the cubs in instead of letting that be their future. He hand-reared them from a young enough age that they never knew any life outside the one he gave them, never knew any human touch but his. Every single morning for years, he unlocked their enclosure himself, walked them across the property, the way another man might walk a dog he'd raised from a puppy, except the dog never grows into something capable of ending a human life in under a minute. That routine is the first thing worth sitting with. Comfort built through repetition is not the same thing as safety. It only feels the same. I want to stop here for a second, because this is the part almost everyone gets wrong about animals raised by hand. People assume tameness is a permanent state, something earned once and kept forever like a certification. It isn't. It's a daily negotiation with an animal that never stopped being exactly what it was born to be. Here's the detail that should have changed everything, and didn't. In 2017, 3 years before this morning, those same 2 lionesses escaped their enclosure and killed a farm worker on a neighboring property. Mathewson kept them anyway. He kept walking them anyway. He had known these animals since they were small enough to sleep curled against his chest, and in his mind, that history outweighed a single violent incident involving someone else on a different property under different circumstances. That reasoning is the failure at the center of this entire case, treating a documented kill as an anomaly instead of a warning. Grief and habit are not the same instinct, and habit in this story was louder. An adult lioness in good health can weigh close to 400 pounds, built entirely around a hunting anatomy refined over millions of years of evolution, retractable claws capable of holding several hundred pounds of struggling prey in place, a bite force strong enough to crush the vertebrae of an animal many times a human's size in a single closure of the jaw, and reflexes tuned to react to sudden movement before conscious thought even catches up with what the body has already decided to do. 2 lionesses moving together are not simply double the danger of one, they coordinate the way they would on a real hunt without needing to plan it. Captivity does not remove any of that anatomy or instinct. It only removes the fear that would normally keep a lion at a distance from a human being. A lion raised by hand does not become a pet. It becomes a predator that has simply stopped being afraid of you, which, depending on the day, can be the most dangerous version of a predator there is. That morning, Mathewson unlocked the gate as he always did. His wife, Gail, 65, followed behind in a vehicle the way she often did. The 2 lionesses were together the way they always were. Then, without any warning anyone could later explain, one lioness turned aggressive toward the other, and in the middle of that redirected aggression turned on Mathewson instead. The attack was fast and specific. One moment the 2 lionesses were interacting with each other the way they always did on these walks. The next, tension flared between them, and in the space of that redirected aggression, one animal turned on Mathewson instead. Not stalking, not calculating, just reacting to sudden proximity and adrenaline. He suffered a severe injury to his groin, the kind that leads to catastrophic blood loss within minutes. If it isn't controlled immediately and out on open ground, far from any hospital, there was no way to control it. Gil got out of the vehicle and tried to distract the animals, calling to them by name, doing everything a person can do with nothing but her voice and her hands against 400 pounds of muscle and teeth. It was not enough. She ran for help instead. By the time anyone reached him, the injuries were already fatal. Think about what that means for the next several minutes of her life. She had to leave her husband on the ground, alive, to go find someone who could help, knowing every second she spent running was a second he didn't have, and knowing there was no guarantee she'd make it back in time either way. There was no ambulance parked outside a private lodge in the middle of the bush, no emergency room a 5-minute drive away. Help had to be summoned from neighbors, radioed in, driven out, and summoned help takes time that a groin injury bleeding out simply does not allow, no matter how fast anyone runs or how urgently anyone called. There is no footage of what happened inside that enclosure. No guests were staying at the lodge that morning, and nobody films their own morning routine after doing it 1,000 times before. The camera only comes out for visitors, never for the owner's daily walk. The only account of his final minutes comes from his wife, who watched it happen and could not stop it. Mathewson died of his injuries on the way to the hospital. Police confirmed the attack and opened an investigation into exactly what triggered it. His family later said the incident may have involved what they described as very rough play, a way of trying to make sense of a death that still, months later, didn't have a clean explanation. No one can say for certain what shifted in that moment, and that uncertainty is its own kind of horror. The animals he trusted completely turned on him for a reason nobody could ever fully reconstruct. The lionesses were tranquilized and relocated to an endangered species center, not destroyed. The lodge's own statement said Demi and Tanner would definitely not be put down, because in their words, West loved those cats as much as he loved his children, and that love outlived him in the decision that was made on his behalf. That is the whole tragedy compressed into a single sentence, one that doesn't need any embellishment to land hard. The thing he loved as much as his own family is the thing that killed him, in front of the woman he built a life with. I want to be careful not to make this a story about a foolish man, because it isn't. It's a story about how love and risk assessment run on completely separate parts of the brain, and how the part that loves an animal will always eventually outvote the part that remembers what that animal actually is. Dr. Louise DeWall, a campaign manager with the conservation group Blood Lions, said afterward that this tragedy wasn't an isolated case at all. Records show at least 40 similar incidents involving captive lions in South Africa over the previous decade, with roughly a quarter of them ending in a human death. Mathewson's story wasn't a freak accident, wasn't some statistical outlier that couldn't have been predicted. It was a well-documented pattern, repeated across dozens of properties just like his, that finally arrived at his own front gate with a new name attached to it. If a man who devoted his life to knowing lions, who had years of hands-on history with these exact two animals, could still misjudge the precise moment one of them stopped being safe, that tells you something uncomfortable about how little any of us actually control once an animal decides to move. The next case doesn't involve years of trust built up over time. It happens in under 3 seconds, and the miscalculation isn't about an animal anyone loved, it's about the 15 feet between a father and his own children. It was early 2025 at Kruger National Park's Mail Lane Gate, one of the most visited entry points into South Africa's largest and most famous wildlife reserve, a park that spans nearly 2 million hectares and holds the full range of the continent's most dangerous animals within a single boundary. A family had just parked near the reception area, the kind of stop every visitor makes on the way in or out, close enough to the buildings and the gate that it feels like the safe part of the trip, far enough into the bush that it never actually is, no matter how many cars are parked around you. Shaik Shabir Ammed, 59, was on a family outing, the kind of ordinary day that never makes anyone think twice about a parking spot near a river. He was a father first, the way most people at that gate are, not a researcher, not a professional guide, not someone with any specialized training in reading animal behavior, just a man who wanted his kids to see elephants up close on an ordinary weekend. The same reason millions of families visit parks like this one every single year without incident. Kruger draws roughly 2 million visitors a year specifically because it puts people this close to elephants, lions, rhino, without a fence in sight for long stretches of road, and the whole appeal of the park rests on that proximity feeling safe enough to enjoy. The park's own signage says it plainly. Inside your vehicle, wild animals read you as background, something to be tolerated and ignored. Outside it, on foot, you register as something else entirely, a threat or prey, and there is no in-between category an elephant recognizes. The area around Mail Lane Gate isn't remote bush either. It's one of the busiest, most developed sections of the entire park, with a reception building, parking, staff on hand, and a steady stream of vehicles passing through every single day. That's exactly why what happened there felt so unthinkable to people who heard about it afterward. This wasn't a family that had wandered off-road into somewhere they shouldn't have been, deep in the wilderness, hours from help. It was one of the most supervised, most heavily trafficked corners of the entire park. The place tourists are told is the safe part of the visit, the beginning and end of the trip rather than the middle of it. An adult African elephant can weigh over 6 tons, heavier than a fully loaded safari vehicle, and despite that size can close a gap of 15 or 20 feet in under 2 seconds when startled or provoked, moving at speeds that outpace a sprinting adult over short distances. Elephants are also, critically, some of the most protective animals in the entire animal kingdom when it comes to their young, or when they perceive a threat near a group, capable of shifting from calm grazing to a full charge with almost no visible transition. There is no outrunning that math once it starts. There is only the distance you never should have let close in the first place, and by the time anyone realizes the gap has closed, the decision has already been made for them by an animal that doesn't negotiate and doesn't slow down to reconsider once it's committed. While the family was parked, the children ran past a nearby bridge and into brush close to the Crocodile River. The kind of small, unremarkable wandering that happens on family outings everywhere. The sort of thing that would be nothing at all in a normal park. This wasn't a normal park. A bull elephant from a nearby herd registered the movement and charged, and there was no gate, no barrier, nothing between the animal and the children except distance that was closing fast. There was no time to calculate anything, no time to weigh options. Ammed saw his kids in the elephant's direct path and moved before he could have consciously decided to. He stepped between his children and 6 tons of animal that was already fully committed to the charge. Close enough now that stopping was not an option for either side, predator or prey, parent or child. Witnesses told investigators the The elephant's attention shifted the instant Ammed put himself in its path, redirecting off the children entirely and onto him instead. A targeting shift that happens in real encounters more often than people expect, because a charging animal is reacting to the nearest and most immediate perceived threat, not executing a plan. It chased him across open ground, caught him, and trampled him before anyone standing nearby could physically intervene. There was no window to act, no pause in the sequence, nothing anyone could have safely inserted themselves into once it started. His children were unharmed, which is the only outcome that mattered to the man who made that decision in a fraction of a second. Ammed died of his injuries at the scene. By the time paramedics and park rangers arrived, the elephant had already moved off, its herd absorbing it back into the bush the same way it had appeared. South African national parks asked the public not to circulate any photos or video of the incident out of respect for the family, which tells you plainly that footage exists somewhere, just never for public release. Collected as part of the park's own investigation into the encounter, kept out of circulation deliberately, not because nothing was recorded, but because what was recorded belongs to a family that has to live with it, not to an audience that would only ever see it as content. Park officials extended condolences and reiterated, once again, the same warning printed on every sign at every gate in the park: never leave the vehicle, no matter how safe the moment feels, no matter how close to the entrance you are. Here's the detail that makes this different from almost every other case in this genre, and it's worth sitting with for a second. Ammed didn't step outside the vehicle for a photograph. He wasn't chasing a better angle or a closer shot for social media, the mistake that shows up again and again in cases just like this one. He didn't misjudge distance out of curiosity or overconfidence. He saw the exact same charge everyone else standing nearby saw, in the exact same instant they saw it, and instead of freezing the way most people do when 6 tons of animal commits to a charge, he closed the distance himself on purpose so that it would reach him instead of his kids. That's not a mistake at all, and it shouldn't be filed alongside the others in this genre where someone got too close, stayed too long, or ignored a rule for a better photo. That's a choice made correctly, in an instant, at the single worst possible cost a father can pay. 2 men, 2 decisions that each felt automatic in the exact moment they were made, decided faster than either of them could have consciously reasoned through. One built over decades of unearned trust in animals he raised himself. One that took less time than it takes to read this sentence, an instinct no parent has to consciously choose. Neither of them had time to weigh the odds, but that's the part that should stay with you longest. By the time either man understood what was actually happening, the outcome was already mostly decided. The last case doesn't have either of those ingredients. There's no history of trust to misplace and no split-second choice to make. It has a woman who simply wanted one more good trip before time made that decision for her instead. It was late March of 2024, inside Kafue National Park in western Zambia, the country's largest and oldest reserve, more than 8,000 square miles of largely unmapped wilderness, home to over 200 documented animal species, known especially among safari veterans for its lion and leopard sightings, and for the sheer unpredictability of a landscape that hasn't been fully tamed for tourism the way some of the continent's more visited parks have. A safari vehicle carrying 6 guests and a guide was out on an ordinary morning game drive from Lufupa Camp, the kind of drive that happens on repeat hundreds of times a season without incident. The routine so well worn that nobody on board that morning had any reason to expect it would be different from any other. Gail Mattson, 79, was from Sun City, West Arizona, where she spent her winters playing bridge and cards with friends in a community built for exactly that kind of slow, comfortable retirement. The rest of the year, by every account from people who knew her, she refused to stay still, traveling constantly, chasing places she hadn't seen yet instead of settling into the routine most people her age settle into. She had told a close friend weeks before the trip that this African safari was her last big trip, not out of any specific fear or diagnosis, no terminal illness, no doctor's warning, just an honest acknowledgement of her age and a quiet determination not to waste whatever years she had left, sitting in a chair waiting for permission to keep living the way she always had. She was, in her friend's words, the culmination of a lifetime of trips, the one she had been building toward her entire adult life, the kind of person who gave away concert tickets rather than miss a single day of the adventure she'd planned. Someone who had already decided, long before boarding that flight, exactly what kind of life she wanted to keep living for as long as she could. I keep coming back to that detail because it means she wasn't careless. She wasn't chasing a thrill. She was simply living exactly the way she wanted to, right up until the moment that stopped being possible. She was almost 80 years old, and by every account from the people close to her, she never let that number slow her down or shrink her plans. Her friend Brenda Biggs, who had known her for years, said Mattson called this trip her last big trip, with a kind of clear-eyed acceptance, not dread. She wasn't running from anything. She was running toward the version of her life she still wanted to live. A bull elephant in an aggressive state can weigh well over 6 tons, more than 4 average cars combined, and, once fully committed to a charge, can reach speeds upward of 25 miles an hour. Moving faster than most terrain allows a loaded safari vehicle to escape, especially through brush and uneven ground rather than open road where a driver has real room to maneuver. Guides are trained for years to read the early warning signs of a real charge coming. Ear position flared wide, a raised trunk, mock bluffs meant to test a driver's nerve before anything becomes real. A certain quality quality of stillness right before an elephant commits fully. A trained guide can read every single one of those signs correctly and still run out a road, because reading a warning and having somewhere to actually take that information are two entirely different problems. And in dense bush, the second one isn't always available no matter how good the first one is. That's exactly what happened here. This wasn't a guide who missed something, who ignored a sign, who took an unnecessary risk to give guests a better view. It was a guide who read every signal correctly in real time and simply had nowhere left to put a several-ton vehicle once the charge was already underway. The elephant charged the safari vehicle without the kind of gradual warning buildup guides are specifically trained to watch for. This one went from calm to committed almost immediately. The vehicle's route became blocked by dense vegetation and difficult terrain on both sides, and by the time the driver tried to reverse out of the animal's path, there simply wasn't enough clear space left behind them to use. The elephant hooked its tusks into the side of the vehicle and rolled it, the way a much smaller object might be flipped by hand. The moment was captured on a passenger's phone, the kind of clip that exists purely by accident, filmed by someone who had no idea in the moment what they were about to record, only that something needed to be documented while it was still happening. Watching it, you can hear exactly how fast calm turns into chaos. There is no gradual buildup on the recording either, just a guide's voice shouting a warning, and then, almost in the same breath, the vehicle already going over. That gap between warning and impact is smaller than most people would ever guess watching from the safety of their own living room, scrolling past it on a phone months later without ever having felt what those 2 or 3 seconds actually feel like in person. Mattson suffered serious injuries in the rollover, the kind of trauma that a remote bush camp, however well equipped for everyday emergencies, simply has no way of treating on site. A helicopter was dispatched to the location and airlifted her across the border to a hospital in South Africa, the nearest facility capable of handling trauma at that scale. A flight that, however fast, still takes time the situation didn't have. She was pronounced dead after arrival. 4 other passengers in the same vehicle were treated for comparatively minor injuries and survived. The tour operator's CEO addressed the incident publicly afterward, saying the guide had followed every element of his training correctly, and that it was the terrain itself, not any human error, not a missed warning sign, not a corner cut for the sake of a better photo, that had closed off the one path that could have kept the vehicle out of reach in time. It was, in the company's own words, a tragedy the training simply couldn't have prevented once the elephant had already decided to charge. A distinction that offers very little comfort, but at least draws a clear line between what could have been controlled and what couldn't. Zambian wildlife authorities and travel safety analysts both noted that this fatality was part of a broader and unusual pattern. Multiple tourist deaths involving elephants across the country within a short span of time, a clustering well above the typical annual average, most of them, like this one, involving older travelers on the trip of a lifetime rather than reckless younger visitors chasing a thrill for a photo. Her daughter, Rona Wells, spoke to reporters afterward, the person left to turn her mother's dream trip into a story about how it ended instead of how it was supposed to. Before Mattson left, she'd given away tickets to a concert to friends back home, telling them plainly to enjoy the show without her. "I'll see you when I get back." It was such an ordinary thing to say. People say it before every trip, every errand, every small departure, and it means nothing until once in a while it turns out to be the last thing you ever tell someone. She never got the chance to see them again, and neither did they get the chance to tell her what the concert was like. 3 deaths, 3 mistakes none of us can honestly say we wouldn't have made. Tell me which one hit hardest. I read every comment.